Hey guys, this is Grace and welcome to my channel. We are on the first video showing the first half of my latest 10 handmade cards, 1 homemade kit. So we're going to go with card number 1, and this one's pretty simple. I started off with a very subtle floral design paper, cutting that just a little bit smaller than my card base, and then I will be using my holly stencil, and I just wanted to use some ink pads with that. I am going to use a finger dauber to be so that I could easily add the ink to it. I was wanting to use some red on the red dots, and so I'm going to try to cover those things up. But really, after I've done a few of the leaves, I decided to just not even bother moving those mask that I was using the washi tape for, because when I put the red on the, even if there's a little bit of green on those red or the spaces for the red dots, it actually gets covered by the red dots anyways. And I'm going to use some Nuvo drops for that. So I'm just here. I was auditioning 2 different kinds of greens, and I ended up with this rubber stampede green one. I just like the darker shade kind of green. So I'm going to do that a little bit, and then I'm going to do the rest of it away from the, or I'm gonna do most of it without filming the rest of it. And there you have it. I did make a mistake when I was putting the red dots, and I accidentally touched it with my finger when it was still wet, and so I had that smudge. But thankfully, with the labels that I've created and the layering that I'm going to be doing with my sentiment, that will be covered up. So I'm just adhering the paper onto the red cardstock. Now, one thing I did want to mention in this video that I had failed to show in my previous video was the cardstock that I will be using to use for my card bases. I neglected to show that. So basically, what I decided to use is this red cardstock, and it was an 8.5 by 11 sheet, so I was able to get 2 card bases out of that. And then I used 1 beige one, so I got 2 out of that, and then 2 8.5 by 11 white cardstocks, so I got 4 out of that. And then I wanted something green as kind of a background, and I pulled out, I don't have any more 8.5 by 11 green ones, so I pulled a 12 by 12 green cardstock and then trimmed that to create 2 A2 size cards, and then the leftovers I actually used for matting and also for cutting more labels for my other cards. So just to give you a heads up, those were the cardstocks that I planned on using for these cards, and I've already made my card bases before I started filming the process for making these cards. And so basically that's my card. I did add a little bit of ribbon because I already have them, and it just gives it a little bit more definition or a little bit more texture. And then because I had the Nuvo drops already, I decided to add a little bit more onto the sentiment. I did heat emboss the holiday hello part and then just stamped a very happy onto the label. Now card number 2, this one, my inspiration for this is like, you know, when you see a wreath on the door. So that's basically what I am going to do. I did stamp and heat emboss the happy holiday sentiment onto the label that I've already pre-cut. I also pulled out some red cardstock from my scrap stash because I felt like I needed some red to go with this kit, especially when I am layering some labels for my sentiments. As you remember, my papers, or the 6x6 pad that I had decided to use, was not a Christmas themed one, and so even though it had some greens in there, I felt like I needed the reds to complete the Christmas theme. And so I also added some stitching edge or stitching element to the edges of the papers by using a sewing tracing tool and also my ruler. So here I'm just adding the doily, and then I'm just going to cut this strip, the bottom of it, into a notch, and then add that in the center, and then add my layers. I had to trim it off so that it will fit my card, and then I'm going to, well, make sure that it's all centered, and then I will be adding the labels that I had pre-cut with the die cut from Inspired by Stamping. I really love that label set because it's a nesting label set, so I can get a lot of different sizes from that one set. And because I already have the Nouveau drops already on my table, might as well. You know, now that I think about it, I should have just picked that Nouveau drop as part of my original product kind of choices, because it's a really fun finishing touch product. So that's card number 2. Now on to card number 3. One of the things that I wanted to do with the images that I chose for this particular kit was to create my own background. So here I'm going to use the elf stamp set, and then I'm going to just stamp that all around my white background, which is actually the backside of a pattern paper. And before I do that, I'm going to add the stitching design on the edge of it with my tracing wheel and my ruler, and then I'm going to go and stamp the elf, and then I'm going to color that with some alcohol markers, which my choice for alcohol markers is my Spectrum Noir markers. So I'm just going to kind of randomly stamping it in different angles so that it would have kind of a cutesy, whimsical design. And I do have a foam underneath my paper. I find that when I have a foam and I'm using some acrylic stamps, that I have a more crisp image versus not having a stamp or a foam underneath it. And I'm just using my favorite things, hybrid black ink, for this. Now that I've done all the stamping, I'm going to pull out my Spectrum Noir markers and I'm going to color. Now if you're interested what kind of marker colors that I used TN3, GG1, TB4, CG4, and I didn't have a red Spectrum Noir marker in my stash, and so I used the Faber-Castell 219 red marker for that. So initially I thought that I would have different kind of looks for my elf, that, you know, some will have brown hair, some will have yellow hair or something like that, but I'm not really good at coloring, and so I couldn't really picture how they would look, and that's why I was kind of not putting the brown hair close to each other. But I just find that it just takes too long if I have different colored elves. I don't know, I'm kind of lazy that way, and so I will end up making all of these elves look the same anyways. So just a heads up, if you are better at coloring, I'm sure that you can do a better job at, if you wanted to recreate this card, you will do a better job at coloring your elves. But for me, I think I'm happy with just a one color kind of thing. So I did spritz, I think that's the word I'm looking for. I did spritz some shimmer spray mist from Maya Road on the paper, just to kind of give it a little bit of shine. And then I had kind of just wanted to put the label sentiment right on top of all of the elf design, but it just seemed like it was getting lost. So I pulled some vellum and cut it into a strip, and then added that to my homemade pattern paper, just to kind of differentiate between the labels and the sentiment and the background as well, because I really didn't want to cover up all of the elves, because I felt like I've done all of that coloring. I didn't want to not show them, and so the vellum worked really well for me to be able to kind of give that definition between the background paper and then also my labels, but at the same time you would still see the images that I have worked so hard to put together. So now I'm done, and then the vellum just seemed like it was a little bit lonely, and so I did add a very subtle pattern paper, and I just cut maybe 3/4 of an inch strip of that, and then added that in the center of the vellum. And that is my my card. I will add some more Nouveau drops because why not? And I just feel like this label, there's parts in the labels that's just kind of looking for something to add to that, the corners of it, and so that's why I added that. Now card number 4 is very similar to number 3, which is that I did the same thing. I stamped the Santa this time and then I colored that in. And if you are wondering what color markers I used for that particular card, sorry if my notebook made a noise there, I was flipping the page. So I use markers CR4, LG3, GG1, GB2, and GB3, all from Spectrum Noir. So this time I've stamped and heat embossed the sentiment, and I wanted that to go, I wanted a horizontal card, but I wanted the sentiment to go vertical. And I had cut out the label where I embossed and stamped the sentiment, and then I also cut out another label that's a little bit bigger from green cardstock, and that will house my white sentiment block. I pulled out my ribbon, my satin ribbon, and that's what I'm going to be putting around that part just to have a little bit of nice design there, finishing touch. And then I'm going to add my label with some foam adhesive, and then I will add a ribbon on top because it just seemed like it was missing something. So I will just tie a ribbon there, put that on the top. And oh, I forgot to mention that instead of misting the whole entire page with the shimmer glittery mist, I used my Nouveau glimmer pen and then just added the shimmer on where the Santa was. So all of the Santas have that shimmer effect on it and not the whole background. And then I'm using some glue dots to adhere the ribbon, and then I will add some finishing touches with some Nouveau drops, and there is my card. I hope that you guys have been liking these kinds of videos. I do plan on making them again, or making some more of them in 2019. I can only do them every other month because it does take a while for me to create 10 cards, videotape them, photograph, and then voiceover. So I hope that you don't mind that I will continue with my schedule of just doing this every other month. So on to card number 5. This will be the last card for this particular video. If you like to see the other cards, make sure that you subscribe because that will be the next video that I post in about a couple of days. And so here's my last card, and this one I went back to the holly stencil, but this time around I wanted to heat emboss the image onto the paper. But before I adhere or I add the stencil onto the paper, I wanted to make sure that I put some anti-static powder on there to make sure that the Versamark would only go on, or the powder would only go where the Versamark ink is on. So I'm just smushing the Versamark ink on there, making sure that I go up and down so that it will only adhere to the openings of the design. And I'm going to pull that out, and then I will pull out my paper from my mat and then pour a lot of that silver embossing powder from American Crafts. This is this powder is new to me, and I really love it. It has a very crisp, like when you heat emboss it, it gives out a very crisp heat embossed image. So I like that. The one thing that I'm going to say, if you're going to try this technique, is make sure that you have a tweezer, because I was just using my fingers and I had touched some of the powder and then took it off of the embossing, so I had to cover or pour some more powder on there. So that was one tip that I kind of learned the hard way, is make sure that I have a tweezer so that I don't accidentally take off some of that powder where I wanted it to go. And I'm pulling some more of that ribbon because, you know, I have it, why not? It's interesting because when I was pulling out my ribbon, I just felt like, well, you know, I might use it, I might not. But you will be surprised how much of the ribbon I end up using at the end when everything was said and done. And so I added another label. This one I used the red, and I cut 2 labels, one on the red that's bigger than my sentiment label, and then of course my sentiment label, which is the back side of a pattern paper that I don't really care for. And then I'm adding some ribbon on the top, and of course finishing it off with some Nuvo drops. Again, if you're liking these videos, please give it a thumbs up. If you are new to me, or new to my channel rather, please consider to subscribe. I do card videos and also scrapbook videos, and I hope to see you guys another day. Bye.